Welcome to the first episode of Three Generations, One Last Name. We don't know if that's going to be the name yet, but that's the premise. I'm joined here by my father, Leo, and my grandpa, Giancarlo, and this is going to be hopefully the first of many to come. And to whoever's watching this, just know that we're creating this with the ideal to preserve these values, these lessons, these stories, you know, for my future kids, my grandkids, great grandkids, or Bruno, or whoever's in the families, you know, to be able to watch and hear these stories and lessons from the original source, so that, you know, we don't lose things in translation. So anyways, I'm here blessed with my grandpa and my dad. Leo, welcome in. How you doing?
Morning, Rafa. Good morning, Dad. How are you guys? Hi, everybody.
Awesome. And
Great
grandpa,
to be here.
how you doing, grandpa?
Hey, doing great. I'm really honored and happy to be here, Rafa.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, we'll get right into it. Obviously, it's our pilot episode here first, so I think it's important that we get to know a little bit about, to some it may be your guest, to some it may be your grandpa, your great grandpa, your great great grandpa, or whoever it might be. But Leo, if you will give a 1 or 2 minute spark notes elevator quick version of kind of your life story, important factors kind of leading up to this point, super quick, in 1 or 2 minutes, go.
All right, let's pack 50, almost 51 years into a few seconds. So yeah, I was born in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, and my life story, I guess you can sum it up as being, for the longest part, a traveler in many ways. Whether it was family, my parents, or my dad moving, or myself having experience in different cities, different states, different countries. I've been around the block, I guess you could say, from, from Brazil to Asia to Mexico, different parts of Asia, and now we've settled in the US. So that's one big part. And then I think the other part is long-lasting relationships, right? I have a history of having long-term relationships, whether it is with your mom, my wife, Tatiana, whether it is keeping, no matter the distance, proximity with the family, whether it's this family, the Zanolinis on my dad's side, but also on my mother's side, uh, distance would never break that bond apart. So, in a nutshell, I guess these are two of the highlights of my lives.
Awesome. Yes, we're very blessed to be able to live in four different countries, right? You know, Brazil, Mexico, Malaysia, and Asia for 9 years, and obviously now in the United States of America as well. He didn't mention, but he's been married to my mom for a long time, and they've been dating since they were 16, which is a fantastic example of love for me. You know, I just got married 2 months ago to my wife, Katie. So, my dad was, very successful, fortunately, and business, insurance, and stuff. So it took us around the world, and it's definitely been a blessing. He also speaks multiple languages fluently, as do I, and so yeah, that's awesome. And he's also a big soccer fan like me. So if the generation are watching this, we better still be Flamengo fans, or he'll come out of his grave to get you. But fantastic intro, Grandpa. Leave it to you. I know, for those who don't know, for some background as well, Grandpa's definitely been a champion and a fighter. He obviously brought our family to America, but very well known for, he beat cancer, what is it, 4 times now? I lost track. 4 times, and still standing fantastically. He's has the most miles ridden in a year, one of the most, in e-foil, the electric surfboard. So, quite savage, and obviously, for some who don't know, he was one of a couple men who brought McDonald's and Outback from United States to Brazil, to name a few things. But anyways, Grandpa, I'll leave it to you. Got a couple more years than Dad, but if you want to put it in a minute or two, kind of culminating life story, just to get a nice little intro here, if you could put it in words, how would you what would you put it?
I will probably, follow you guys on the diversity of experiences that our family has gone through. Leo expressed that, you expressed that, and I think it's important to remind and be aware that, my father, although I was born in Brazil, just like Leo, I was born in Rafael. No, Rafael was born in Curitiba, not in Rio. But anyhow, Leo and I, born in Rio, Rafael in Curitiba, three Brazilians born in Brazil. But I was born from an Italian father that was born in Milano, that came to Brazil after the war, 1948, couldn't speak Portuguese, and met my mom. That, yes, was born in Brazil, but was the only sibling in the whole family that was born in Brazil. The whole family was from Portugal, and very diverse culture between the two families. Between my father from northern Italy, kind of Switzerland kind of attitudes, and my mom, a Portuguese, characteristic Portuguese family, food habits, many different habits. So that instilled in me an appreciation and an eye for different cultures and their respective cultures. On top of that, I was raised with a very adventurous father that pushed me to my limits and gave me wings, so to speak, to dare to do. And so when I was 16, I was blessed. I kind of dreamed about it, and my father helped me as much as he could. And I was blessed to come to the United States by myself at 16 without English and attending a public high school, New Haven, Connecticut, in December from tropical Rio de Janeiro.
A little colder, huh?
A little colder. So,
Yeah.
and I spent a wonderful 1 year here.
Hmm.
My father back then, he didn't have a formal education and he couldn't get a green card. So my family couldn't come. And I kind of, although I loved the United States back then, I gave up my dreams for the family and went back to Brazil. And I tease people, I say I'm dumb and slow. And it took me 35 years to come back here to the United States. And I feel blessed that me coming was able to kind of scout the way for the whole family here. So now we have, beside Rafa and Victor, his brother, Leo's children, we have my daughter, Bruna, that has two boys. So we have a bunch of Americans' grandchildren, and I believe that's the way it's going to go for decades to come, like Rafa said. No, that's it.
Awesome. Amazing. No, great to have an insight, great to have a background. Look forward to, us diving into those stories of, you trekking over here and leaving back to Brazil, but then coming back and now we're here now. So definitely awesome, especially when we're thinking about kind of like the butterfly effect, right? How so many little things happen. It's almost like, it's to me, for me personally, it's like for me, it's like it points to obviously God, right? Like it's almost crazy that everything can happen so perfect, but we're here and we're happy. And so, anyways, just to kind of dive into this as well. Um, um, so let me ask you. I mean, we'll start off with Leo. I think since obviously we have here three generations of men. Honoring others, Zanolini men who couldn't be here on this call. I think it's important for a first question. Not everybody out there is blessed to have strong and positive, male influences sometimes in their life. So as far as you, Leo, I mean, I guess what's the best advice your father ever gave you?
Well, it's hard to pick one best advice, but I'll tell you something that Grandpa has always told us. Believe in yourself and go after your dreams. Pursue your dreams, right? Don't don't be caught on the rat race of just doing what everybody's doing. Just expand your wings and fly. People say, don't fly too high because the sun might burn your wings, right? That's not true. So I was always inspired by the story that he's just told you that he had. Imagine that in the early 70s, where there were very little connection or technology for him to have gone to the US back then. That inspired me, right? And I did the same 20 years later. And I was already, one day we can tell that story. I remember vividly, I was already living with Grandpa. That was the year 1990. I think, the idea started when we were living in São Paulo. It was about me. That was the time I started dating your mom. By the way, I was 15, not 16. She
And
would,
I was actually born in Rio, if
yeah.
I'm not.
The three of us were born in Rio.
Yeah.
That's right. We lived in Curitiba back then. We can go into these details later, but you're right. You were born in Rio. Anyway, so that inspired me, and we planned my trip experience, my exchange student experience in the U.S. It wasn't Connecticut, was Ohio. It was a much smaller town, I guess, even than New Haven back then. So I follow his footsteps, and in many ways, right? I think I was inspired and always given latitude. One thing that I in many ways, I try to do with you guys, you and your brother, but your grandpa always allowed an environment where a child or a young man was able to mature on his own terms, right? Of course, guidance, leadership, direction, but not control or overprotection, right? And
Hmm.
that was great because it inspired me to seek many of my dreams and ambitions, and it expanded my horizons. So you I don't know if it's a one piece of advice. You wouldn't be doing justice to name it one, but I guess to believe in yourself and expanding your wings and flying and braving the world, right? That discovery spirit that I think traces back to our genetics generations ago. Your grandpa was telling you, just like how my grandpa, your great grandpa had the story, and I guess the story dates. We're going to have opportunities in this podcast to maybe relive some of these family stories, but our from generations ago we had this I guess explorers mentality of braving the wild world.
Awesome. No, I totally, have seen that come to fruition in my life. And I love that because, I mean, even going back to when I was a kid, what, maybe 5.5 years old, maybe a little bit older, maybe it was already 7 or 8. But, I remember flying all by myself from Brazil to America or America back to Mexico. Anyway, it was a long international flight. And, I was able to go on my own. And I mean, you think nowadays some parents don't even let their 17-year-old kids spend a night at home alone or whatever, walk to the bus stop if anyone does that nowadays by themselves. So I think that kind of controlled liberty or controlled chaos where, you allow a child to, you know, mess up, fall, right? So they can learn and not necessarily just control them. At the same time, obviously, not put them in a dangerous situation, but, I feel like you guys let me explore a lot, right? Like let me sleep over at friends' house from a young age. Let me, explore things and do things that some parents wouldn't let kids do, and I think it allowed for a lot of maturity and a lot of experience. So I super relate that to my life as well. I guess, Grandpa, for you, I mean, what sticks out from your father, right? Your father, Franco. I guess what's the best piece of advice that comes to mind that your father ever gave you?
I would say, very similar to Leo. It's not one thing, the big achievements don't happen overnight. It's usually a sequence of small tendencies that will push towards something, and it's daring. It's, not limiting yourself because our worst enemy are our own selves. It's believing in ourselves and teaching our children to believe in themselves, because that's the biggest challenge. Like you said, how sad is it that eventually nowadays a 17-year-old wouldn't be allowed to sleep on a friend's house because their parents wouldn't allow it? Doesn't make any sense. Zero sense. You got to stay with your kids and give them, opportunity. Just to give you examples of the same thing that Leo expressed. It's just passing over to future generations. When I was young, before I came to the States, so I was like 13 or 14 years old. I had my father, who always loved the ocean. He all gave me, an allowance, and I saved the allowance, and he would do a match up, and I was able to buy a very tiny boat, wooden boat, really tiny, wooden, like 9 feet, like almost like a stand-up paddleboard, but
Mm-hmm.
with a sail. And he will drive me to a place where we'll keep the boat at 6:30 in the morning because he had to start working at 7. Drop me off. The place was closed. I would sit in the middle of the road waiting for the place to open up at 7:30 for like an hour. At 13, sitting in the middle of nowhere, waiting for the place to open, get on the boat, and go out sailing through the Guanabara Bay. If anybody looks on the map, the thing is huge. And I would capsize and I would dare and I would find a way to be back in the place at the end of the day because my father was going to swing and come by. And I never knew until I was an adult that my father, many times on his lunch break, without me knowing, he will come, go up on top of the hill, and watch with the binoculars. Where am I? Am I in danger? Did I capsize? Does he need to go after a rescue operation? To make sure that at least once a day he could see if I'm still surviving in the middle of that huge, huge bay.
Wow.
So next time, Rafa, that you go to Rio, besides going to that area that we're discussing, hop on a ferry boat and go to Paquetá, an island in Guanabara Bay, to have an idea of the extension of Paquetá and the Guanabara Bay. And imagine on a subboard crossing the whole thing across. And
Oof,
that's
man.
how we instill it, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
one more thing for the daddies or daddies to be here, your kids many times will not want it, will resist it. And even sometimes your wife will be afraid of you trying to allow them so much latitude, so much self-empowerment. But it's very, very, very important. For instance, an example of what Leo is proud of today, Leo always loved baseball, soccer. Sports are different than mine. But that's perfectly right, no problem whatsoever. And I wanted him when we were in Sao Paulo, like he mentioned, to come and come to the United States and experience what I experienced when I was a teenager. And obviously, at the beginning, that's something wild. We're talking 1990, last century. So 1990, it's a different world. And he was kind of a little reluctant naturally, but I noticed that he loved baseball. So what I figured out there's something called World Series. I believe that's the name.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
That's
was
it.
going
That's it.
on in New York. And he was, and I believe he still is, a Mets fan, a crazy Mets fan. So I said, well, what about we go and see the World Series there? So we came to New York, him and we were I watched so many baseball. I think it was the only time in life that I watched so many baseball games, maybe one or two after that.
Yeah.
But he fell in love. He felt comfortable. That's how that's what I learned from my father. Teach your children to dare, but always have a safety net that they don't know exist. They don't know that they exist. So Leo coming here with a baseball make him feel more secure. And so much so that see now he's proud. He's mentioning that as something special. So this blend on being crazy, being adventurous but not being dumb. It's it's really important. I think it's a male uh, attitude, very important for a healthy family.
Yeah, 100%. And I can even relate it to, when I was in college, I spent a year and a half living by myself in Orlando, all by myself, right? And I think it's most men don't experience time on by themselves. Like just especially nowadays with social media and phones, like times where you're just alone, right? It's just you and you're independent and you're exploring and you're doing, there's no one there to tell you to do things, but you have responsibilities, but no one necessarily holds you accountable. So you become the one that needs to be the man to hold yourself accountable, right? And if it's not for you in that day, it's for your future self. And a lot of decisions that you make, it's either going to benefit your current self, but not your future self, or it might be more painful today, but it'll lead to pleasure later. I think that's an interesting balance that we can talk about is the dynamic between pain and pleasure, right? Pleasure now a lot of time means pain later. Pain now a lot of times leads to pleasure later. And I think it goes back to what you guys were talking about, giving your children wings. That's the way I want to raise my kids as well, right? Like I can totally picture myself being like, hey, my kid's like whatever, 12 years old and he wants to go down to Miami to watch a Messi game. If Messi's still playing, then I don't know, probably not. But awesome. Here's a bus ticket. Bus leaves at 7 a.m. Here's the game ticket. Go, be back here tomorrow morning at 9, I'll get you from the bus stop. Text me only on emergencies and whatever, go. You know what I mean? And so, anyways, I think that's important. And what's crazy is that if we take it back even one generation further, and again, this might be a story for next episode, but in short, my grandpa's dad, my great grandpa Franco, who we just mentioned, when he was in the war, was it World War II?
Yes.
World War II. We'll get into the whole story, but essentially, correct me if I'm wrong. He fled back to Italy away from the Germans, right? Am I
Yes.
right? And but obviously Italy was over. Germans would capture any kind of missing soldiers or soldiers that ran away, right? And long story short, and you'll tell it in another episode, right? He shows up to our my great grandpa's house, right? Giovanni, and he's like, "I'm home, I'm back, I escaped." And I mean, correct if I'm wrong, Grandpa, right? If you wanna just, maybe since we're this far in the story, if you wanna just finish it off there, what happened there? What was Giovanni's reaction? But what I want to get to is, when you go to explain him being in the rubble and Giovanni bringing him a piece of bread and a little bit of wine, if I'm not mistaken, every day, and him telling him, "Hey, if I come back the next day and I see the wine and the bread still here, I'm gonna stop bringing it because I know you died," right? And trusting him, right, giving him wings and trusting him that he'll go back there and eat the bread and the wine so that he can still know his son is alive during all that rubble and all that tumult, the tumultuous time. Like, it's crazy how that's an echo of these things that we're still talking about today. So if we want to end it off by you telling that story while we're here, we only got a couple minutes left of the recording, but if you want to bring that story to life here, I think that's a great segue to end this off and kind of bring it together and show independence, trust as two big values that we hold. So take it away.
Yeah, I would say that the really big takeaway is to be a leader. It's hard and it's lonely. And many times people do not understand you. They cannot grasp the scope of all the variables that, a leader has to process at the same time. Just back to the example that you mentioned when my father was arrested my father was Italian. And after when Italy surrendered in World War II, all Italians in soldier age were put in prison camps in Germany. And my father went down from 175 pounds to like 120 pounds, 115 pounds in a prison camp. It was not an extermination camp, luckily, but it was a damn prison
For real,
camp.
luckily.
Yeah, many of his peers died there, either by the hands of the Germans or by starvation. Anyhow, they were offered to fight for Germany, and they would be fed and trained, and that's what they did. And then he found an opportunity and deserted the German force, risking his life, and came back home. There's a long story that we can go on next time. But when he got home at night, everybody was happy. Everybody thought he was dead. And everybody started celebrating. And my grandpa, your grandfather, shut everybody up. And people were kind of mad with him and got my father and took him off the house and through the night in the middle of the rubble and said exactly that because the family was starving. So in order to share food with an extra person was really challenging. But he said exactly that to my father. In the middle of the rumble, they picked a place and say, every day I'll bring some bread and wine to keep you alive. But the family will be, hungrier because we're sharing it with you. So make sure you come back and use it. Because if you don't, for any reason, we will understand that you're gone, unfortunately. And we'll keep using the bread and the wine. And he survived for many months until the war was over. And nobody ever saw him until the war was over and he showed up again. But the day after, my grandfather took my father out of the house in the middle of the night into the middle of the rubbles. The day after, the SS surrounded the building because the neighbors noticed what happened and they gave the family up to the SS to win something, either food or some benefit.
They
And it was
snitched to
not
the
so much.
they snitched to the German soldiers. For those who don't
Yes,
know what SS.
yes. in order to some sort of benefit. That's your neighbors, and when the situation is there as a war. And we're not my grandfather capable of making such a hard decision. We all probably wouldn't be here because they would be dead.
So the SS soldier came the next day and knocked on the door. Is that right?
Not only knocked, they didn't knock, they busted the door, they went in looking for everybody. And my grandfather, he stood up to the SS captain and said, "What? You're saying my son is a deserter? And you coming here to look for him? I gave you my healthy and strong son to fight for you. You go out, find him, and bring him back." So reversing the situation, and the guy was surprised by the action and situation. Instead of being chicken out, he just stood to the captain, SS captain. And the guy got confused and retrieved all the troops and went away. So we're here because of that.
Wow. That's incredible. It's incredible. I think that's a great way to leave this off on our first episode. As a leader, sometimes you got to make quick and important gut decisions, even though some people around you might doubt it, or you might hear some negativity, but knowing that you're doing the right thing, and with the care of others, right? Sometimes hard decisions need to be made, right? So I'm sure your dad wasn't thrilled that he was being taken to rubble after he just fled and finally was safe. And but again, obviously us three wouldn't be here today. So I'm thankful. I'm sure, Leo, I'm sure you're happy for that decision too, huh?
Yeah, you're right.
Awesome, guys. Well, hey, I think it's been an incredible first episode. And we look forward to having you guys here on the next one. And yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Again, this is Rafa, Leo, and Giancarlo. Check it out. We'll see you guys on the next episode, guys. Thank you guys so much.